Hey everyone, Bella here, and in this video we're going to be talking about how you can make your writing stronger and more intentional through using specific literary devices. So what are literary devices? Essentially, all of literature is made up of a bunch of different literary devices all weaved together in order to construct something that has an intentional perception for your readers. Now, that's really just a fancy way of saying that there are certain elements you can put into your novel or your story or your book in general that can help readers perceive it the way that you intend them to. This helps to craft a much better experience for the reader as a whole because you're really in charge of crafting how you want them to feel based on the literary devices and elements that you put in your book and where. Now, there are a whole slew of different literary elements and devices that you can use, but what we're really going to focus on today are the top 15 that we believe have the most impact on your novel and can shape it the best. So here is a list of literary devices you can use in your novels with some examples, definitions, and kind of tips for how to use them well. And the first step we have, number one, is allusion. Not to be confused with illusion. Allusions are often used to create a sense of realism and also helps connect the readers to the story because a lot of people feel more connected to what they're reading if there are elements of the real world within the fiction that they're reading. So here's an example of an allusion in writing. Just having the sentence, "Careful now, you don't want to go opening Pandora's box," is a great way to bring something from the real world, which is Pandora's box, a legend and a story, from your real life into your fictional novel. Another example of something that is kind of more recent or pop culture would be something along the lines of writing in, "He was a real good guy ball buster, the Deadpool of his time." So something like that, referencing Deadpool, which is a comic book character and now turned into a movie, it's a great way to help describe the character that we're talking about in a way that connects with your reader and in the real world. Literary device number two is diction. Basically, diction is just the choice of words and style of the way that you're writing. There are a few different types of diction that you can use, and it really helps separate what type of book it is and the tone overall. We have formal diction, and formal diction is just basically when you're using more of a formal or a higher class, a more educated way of speaking. The reason you would use formal diction is perhaps when you have a book that is meant for more educated audience, or you have a character within your book who is of a higher class and you're hoping to share that message across. The second form is informal diction, and that's basically when your characters or you, if you're writing a nonfiction book, are speaking directly to everyday people. It's very informal, there's slang, there's a whole bunch of different things thrown in there that is just a relaxed, formal, natural way of speaking. Slang diction is when you're using newly coined words or phrases or slang in your world. Now, this can be real life slang, or you can make up slang for your own. A great example of this is Jenna Moreci does in her book Eve the Awakening. It's set about 80 years in the future, and she created slang for her characters because as time goes by, we do create our own slang. So that makes it more realistic as well as just adding to that style of diction. The last form is colloquial diction, which is basically just the use of everyday language. Now, this might change depending on what culture and customs are in your novel. But overall, diction is just the way in which you write the story, the book, or certain people's point of views if you have multiple in your book. An example of more formal diction would be something like the phrase, "I bid you adieu." It's not really something that you just say when you're saying bye to your friends, unless you guys have sort of a weird thing going on. But normally you'd say, "All right, I'll see you later." That's more of an informal diction, whereas "I bid you adieu" is much more formal and proper. Another form is a sentence of, "I remember her hair. It was amazing and on fleek." Now, this is definitely more slang and informal. We're throwing in more of a recent slang word in general, and it gives a much different vibe than the first example, and you can see that. So if you kind of focus on one throughout your whole book, it can change the entire tone and perception of what your readers are reading. Literary device number three is alliteration. Now, alliteration is basically the use of similar consonants right after each other in order to kind of make something sound the same. So a common example is Sally sells seashells by the seashore. Obviously, that's a little bit of a tongue twister, but alliteration is kind of used in order to give your writing more of a rhythm. This is probably more commonly seen in titles and in poetry. However, if you do bring this literary device into your writing, it can create something really special for your reader, something that has rhythm even though it is just a novel or a book. A A great way to use alliteration in your writing is to break up a paragraph that might be a little bit longer or boring, like a description, and use alliteration in a few sentences in order to create a rhythm that is a little bit more exciting for the reader. Literary device number 4 is allegory. An allegory is a figure of speech where abstract ideas are basically described using events, characters, or other elements. Think of it as a story within your story. It's as if you're telling a much bigger, more powerful message through a smaller, more digestible story. One of the most famous examples of this is in George Orwell's Animal Farm. Basically what this story is where a group of farm animals basically kind of band together and rise above the farm keepers, the people who are essentially in charge of them. Now that might seem like a kind of a really inspiring little story, but what it's kind of based around and what it's trying to tell the story of is the Russian Revolution. And so that's kind of the example of the Animal Farm story is an allegory for the Russian Revolution. Literary device number 5, colloquialism. Colloquialisms are expression, words, and phrases that are used in everyday speech. So a couple examples of this would be bamboozle, or gonna, be blue as a way of saying sad, over yonder to say over there, da bum meaning the best. These are great to use just to kind of, again, set the tone for the novel or that character in particular, connect your readers to the world a little bit more, and if you're creating a story that's in its own world, you can actually create these different colloquialisms, say that word 5 times fast, in your own world that can help the world building a lot more. Literary device number 6 is euphemism, and there are different ways you can think of euphemisms. There are different types of euphemisms, but one that probably popped in your mind right away are sexual euphemisms, probably just because they are ones that we use most often. But euphemism is basically just a kinder, better way of saying something that's a little bit harsh or distasteful or not appropriate for the moment, which is often why sexual euphemisms get put into play. A couple examples of something that is not quite in that way but is still a euphemism could be saying before I go, as in before I die, or saying something like rear end instead of butt, or perspiring instead of sweating, tipsy instead of drunk, thin on top instead of bald. You get the idea. Basically saying something a little bit nicer to avoid the harsher, even if it's more accurate phrasing of what you want to say. Again, this is something that you can make up for your own world if it's set in a world that's not in our own. So those different customs and those different things might not be the same. So in my story, I'm writing a fantasy novel set in its own world. There's a euphemism we say, essentially, they say you're gonna kill the tree. And essentially what that basically means is that you're being lazy. So if you ask somebody, oh, are you just gonna kill the tree? It's essentially saying, are you just gonna be lazy and not do that? So these are types of things that you can create in your own world. Literary device number 7 is flashbacks. Now we're getting into something that is more of a plot element and a story structure element than it is just something that you can add into your writing. So flashbacks have to be very, very intentional. And if you don't know what a flashback is, it's just simply going back in time from the present place in your story or your book. Flashbacks can be used for a number of different reasons. It can be to further a plot point, it can be to uncover information the reader needs to know, or it can be used as a reoccurring plot device that either impacts your main character or helps them along in their journey. One book that does this really, really well is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. She uses the flashbacks as a literary device and as a plot device. So basically every other chapter she has, it goes back in time to some event and then back to the present. And so this, because it carries on throughout the story, it serves as a plot device. And the one thing that you want to make sure with flashbacks are that they are useful and important. So if you want to get a good feel of how to do flashbacks in the present moment effectively, definitely recommend reading that book. Literary device number 8 is foreshadowing. So foreshadowing, for those of you who don't know, is essentially giving hints and clues about what's to come in your novel. Essentially, you don't want readers to be able to pick up on those, but you want them to look back at the novel and be like, oh, I should have known that. I should have picked up on that detail. This is a really important part in your story because if you never give your readers any clues as to what's to come, they're going to be very confused by the outcome. But if you drop these little hints that they don't pick up along the way, but then they look back and they realize at the climax or whatever big event is happening that it makes complete sense and they should have seen it all along. That is what readers want. They want that surprise, but they want the surprise to make sense, and the foreshadowing is how that surprise or that twist makes sense in the end. A really popular example of this in a movie specifically is in the Avengers movie, when there is a ship's engineer playing a game on their little computer, and the purpose of the game is actually to defend Earth from the alien invaders, which is what happens later in the novel. It's a very small thing that very few people probably pick up on, but that just makes the end in the climax that much better. So if you can drop in those little hints that blindside your reader at the time, but then add up and make sense in the end, you will be doing foreshadowing effectively. If you want more examples and want more tips on how to foreshadow well, we have a video right up there for you to check out. Literary device number 9 is imagery. Imagery is essentially the use of visually descriptive or figurative language in your story in order to paint a much clearer picture. Really what you're trying to do with imagery, as the name suggests, is create an image in your reader's mind. There are several examples of this, but essentially if you're describing something in detail and you're giving it enough description in order to paint a picture, you are using imagery. And this also helps you show rather than tell in your writing as well. Literary device number 10 is personification. If you don't remember personification from middle school or elementary school, it's essentially giving human-like characteristics to non-human things. There are a lot of really good reasons to use personification. One in particular is that it just brings a new element to your writing. It is a new perception and perspective that your readers probably don't get a lot, and it allows you to uniquely craft how they view different things. A couple of examples of this are: 1, the wind whistled past my ears like a familiar tune I'd long forgotten. The reason this is because wind can't actually whistle. Technically, we use that a lot, but it's technically a human trait. The second example is the moon yanked a blanket of silver light over the forest. So this essentially is giving the moon the power to yank a blanket up, kind of like, a parent or such. Example number 3 is squatting in the corner was a felt chair covered in the dust and damp of abandonment. And so essentially we're giving the chair the human trait of being able to squat. So this just adds a little bit more to your writing and allows you to craft more unique prose that is more reflective of how you see the world as well. Literary device number 11 is juxtaposition, and this is probably one of my favorites because it allows you to craft and kind of manipulate the emotions of your readers. And juxtaposition is basically putting contrasting elements next to each other in order to amplify them a little bit more. There are a few different ways you can do this. You can actually do this within words themselves or sentences. You can do this with themes, and you can also do this within chapters or scenes as well. So a big thing that I've learned and what I find that I love the most in books is when you end a chapter on a sad note and then you start the next one on like a happy or a higher note. So that roller coaster of emotions effect that a lot of readers love is going to be done through juxtaposition. And here are just a few examples of that. So number 1 would be something along the lines of this famous phrase of, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. And so those contrasting elements right next to each other helps to amplify the message as a whole. So example number 2 is, I hate loving you. Something that simple can really impact the emotion of what is being said and which character, or if it's you and you're writing a nonfiction book, what that means to you. And so example number 3 is, you will soon be asked to do great violence in the cause of good. And this is very important because good and violence are very different. They're contrasting elements. And so as you can see in these examples, what you get is something much more powerful because you are placing those contrasting elements right next to each other. So don't think that you have to do this within just sentences or words. This is something you can do on a much broader scale throughout the entirety of your novel, from scene to scene, chapter to chapter, etc. Literary device number 12 is a metaphor or simile. Yes, I know they're different, but they are very similar, so we're lumping them in one. Metaphors and similes are basically comparisons used in order to help your reader picture something better or understand something a little bit better. A metaphor is basically things that are not alike being compared by replacing the word. So an example of a metaphor would be, she was drowning in a sea of her own despair. Whereas a simile is kind of more of a direct comparison by using like or as. So kind of giving the same example, it would read something more like, it's as if she was drowning in a sea of her own despair. One more example of a metaphor is saying his heart was led, weighed down by the memory of what he had done. Whereas if you use a simile, it would say his heart was like lead, weighed down by the memory of what he had done. Now there's kind of instances where you can use one or the other. I personally like metaphors a little bit better because it brings you closer to the character, it's more impactful. But there are places for both, and you just have to know the difference. Literary device number 13 is onomatopoeia. And for those of you who can't spell it, I am right there with you, but essentially an onomatopoeia is a word that's used to describe a sound. And so something like bang or snap or zip or buzz, all of those are onomatopoeias, and typically they're italicized when in writing, just so people know that this is representative of a sound. And the reason you would use this is obviously just to create more of an impact for the reader, something more of an experience, and it hits more of their senses than just saying it made a weird sound. Literary device number 14 is symbolism. Now, symbolism is used across all literature. It's something that is probably the most digested, that along with themes, when people do decide to kind of pick apart what they've read. Basically, symbolism is the use of a specific element or situation or something in order to symbolize something more drastic or bigger. And this can be a message, an idea, or a concept. So an example of this is crows being used to kind of predict death or tragedy coming, or a storm also predicting something bad, or the color red predicting violence, or even spiders symbolizing something that's sneaky or not quite right. So there's a lot of different things you can use here, and you can create your own symbolism if you are writing a story that's in your own world. Create something that is common knowledge there, like crows are for us here. Literary device number 15 is tone. Now, the tone has the power to completely transform your story from start to finish, and the tone is essentially the narrator's thoughts, feelings, or opinions about what's going on, and not so much the actual thoughts, but how what they're saying is written and what that what perception that leaves for your readers. So can they tell if the narrator is happy or annoyed or sad about what's happening in the story? That is your tone. And so it's something you really want to think about when you're crafting your story. It does also play into diction quite a bit. So if you're using a formal diction, your tone is probably going to be more straight-laced, uptight, something a little bit more along those lines. Whereas if you're using informal, it's probably going to feel more natural or relaxed. But you do want to keep your tone in mind when writing your story because it does have the power to completely shift your narrative. And that's all I've got for you guys today. If you're ready to take your book to the next level and actually make some progress and potentially publish it here pretty soon, check out our training up here. It's a free video training from Chandler Bolt, taking you through exactly what you need from start to finish to write, market, and publish your book. So make sure to check it out, and also check out the resources I have down below for you. Give this video a like if you learned something new or if you found it helpful, and actually comment down below, what literary device do you enjoy the most in reading and as well as writing? Let me know down below. Give this video a like, subscribe, and I will see you next time.
And I'm writing a walk through the Bible. There was the self-doubt of, am I ready for this? Do I have the credibility? Are people going to listen to me? I started looking at this school and I opened up the website and looked at it and I was like, maybe this is for me. Maybe this is what I should try and do, because I didn't have a support system. I don't have any friends.